Hello Year 5, I hope you're sitting comfortably and ready for the next chapter of Journey to the River Sea. I thought I'd come outside to read to you today, but I'm just hoping that there's no spiders or any bugs that come and bother me whilst I read. Okay, we're going to carry on and we're going from chapter 6. The police chief was in a bad temper. He'd hoped to go to the matinee of Little Lord Fauntleroy. Colonel de Silva was in his 50s, a crack shot and a man of steel with an amazing moustache, but he loved the theatre. Opera, ballet, stories about little boys melting the hearts of ancient earls. It was all the same to him. But he had had a cable from police headquarters in London asking him to give help to Mr. Lowe and Mr. Trapwood, who had come to the Amazon to find a missing boy and bring him back to England. The detectives were acting for an important person in Britain, the message had said, and he was to do everything he could to make the search easier. It wasn't the first time that the unpleasant Englishman had been to see him. They had asked him to put up notices in the police station and on hoardings in the city, asking for news of the son of Bernard Taverner, and they had made him put the amount of the reward on the notice. Not that he expected anyone to come forward. "I am not prepared to go on like this any longer," said Mr. Trapwood, whose face had turned bright red in the heat. "We've talked to 100 people and no one knows about the boy. It's ridiculous. It's a conspiracy." "We have to get back to England," croaked Mr. Lowe in a hoarse voice. He had swallowed the backbone of a spiny fish in his breakfast stew, and it had scratched his throat. "The boy must be brought to Westwood. There's no time to be lost." Both men glared at Colonel de Silva, who looked at the clock and realised he was going to miss the play. "I tell you, no one knows of such a boy, unless, perhaps... Ah, yes, wait, I think I heard something. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure. There is a boy living with the Umbuda Indians. Some say he's Mr. Taverner's son, and he left him there to be looked after." "To be looked after by Indians?" Both men stared at him, outraged. "Let me tell you, sir, that Taverner may have been a wastrel, but he was born an English gentleman." The colonel opened his mouth and shut it again. The less the crows knew, the better. "Then I am too a gentleman, and I have an Indian grandmother, a woman of great wisdom who brought me up. There are many mixed marriages here, and we are all proud of our ancestors." Mr. Lowe and Mr. Trapwood put their heads together. "You have good evidence that the boy might be Taverner's son." Colonel de Silva shrugged. "It is rumoured," he said, "to be a handsome boy and fair. I will show you the place on the map. It's only 2 days on the riverboat. It will not take you long to find out, and the Umbuda people are very gentle," he said, producing a crumpled chart and wondering why he hadn't sent them to the Kurakara, who had been cannibals for many generations. "The boat goes at 9 in the morning," he said. "I will send an interpreter with you, and I hope your journey will be a success." When they had left, the colonel picked up a toothpick and watched them out the window. At least that would get them out of the way for a few days. Not that he expected anyone to give Finn away. What Westwood had done to Bernard Taverner was well known to his friends. Taverner had been fearless in the jungle, but those who had camped with him on his collecting trips remembered the nights when he had woken in terror after a dream, with the name Westwood on his lips. After a while, the colonel opened the door to his office. "Go to the museum and tell Professor Glastonbury that I've sent the Englishman upriver," he said to the policeman. "But he's to tell Finn to stay where he is. I don't know how long they'll be away." The professor would send the little lad from the fish market, who was Tappy's nephew, up to the huts behind the carter's house. The Indians there would do anything for Taverner's son. In the beautiful theatre in Manus, with its crimson and gold decorations, its pillars and statues, the audience was waiting for the curtain to go up on Little Lord Fauntleroy. Beatrice and Gwendolen were on the front stalls with their mother. The box of chocolates they were guzzling was on the arm of the seat between them, and their plump fingers stirred the tissue paper as they dug for their favourite centres, making a loud rustling noise. "I wanted that one," complained Gwendolen, as Beatrice's jaws moved up and down on the hazel nougat. "Mama, why can't we have 2 boxes of chocolates? We ought to have one each." Mrs. Carter was craning her head, peering at the people in the audience. "Look at that ridiculous Russian woman," she said, as Sergei's mother came down the aisle, "wearing her emeralds in the middle of the afternoon, and they're bringing their governess, giving her ideas." As she passed the twins, Sergei turned and said, "Where's Maya?" "She couldn't come. She isn't well," said Beatrice. "Oh, I'm sorry. Is it anything serious?" The twins shook their heads, both together, left to right, right to left, and Sergei moved on. "Doesn't Netta look silly in that dress?" said Gwendolyn. "I suppose her parents couldn't afford a proper party frock." It wasn't true that there were no seats left. They could have bought Maya a ticket quite easily. All the same, the theatre was nearly full. The Pilgrim Players might have been a small company that no one had ever heard of, but out here people went to everything. Old ladies had come to see Little Lord Fauntleroy, even without a grandchild in tow, and army colonels with fierce moustaches, and of course every child whose parents could afford a ticket was there. Mrs. Carter opened her programme. There was a picture of Clovis King inside. It had been taken 3 years earlier, and he looked very sweet. "I bet Maya doesn't really know him. I bet she just made it up," said Gwendolyn. "Clovis King in the part he has made particularly his own," read Mrs. Carter. Clovis was Cedric, the American boy who finds he is heir to his grandfather's title and has to leave his simple life in New York, where he is friends with the grocer and the shoeshine boy, and travel to England to start a new life as an aristocrat. With his beautiful mother, Dearest, he melts the heart of his stern old grandfather, the Earl, and starts doing good to the peasants on the estate. But there is a dastardly plot. "What's dastardly?" said Beatrice, her mouth full of chocolate. "It means wicked," said Mrs. Carter. "Dastardly plot to usurp Little Lord Fauntleroy's place, which is foiled." But the house lights had dimmed, the curtains parted, the play had begun. Maya ran across the empty square towards the theatre. She was out of breath. Her efforts to scrub the blood off her hand and tidy herself up had not been very successful, but she thought of nothing except to keep her promise to Clovis. But she was too late. Everyone had been sucked into the theatre. There were a few beggars on the steps, an old woman selling peanuts, nobody else. She ran round to the side of the building and found the stage door, which she opened. She was in luck. The Goodley's nephew was sitting in the cubbyhole, with his feet on the desk, smoking a cigarette. "Oh, please," said Maya, trying to get her breath. "I promised Clovis I'd be here for his opening. We met on the boat. Would you let me wait for him?" "Sure, but why don't you just go out to the front and see the show? I'll tell him you're here." "I can't. There aren't any tickets." The youth raised his eyebrows. "Who told you that?" He turned to the notice board and took down an envelope. "Here, front row of the stalls. Saved for the police chief, but he hasn't turned up. Eaten by a croc, most likely." "Would that be all right?" asked Maya, not wanting to waste time in explaining about the crocodiles on the Amazon. "But I don't know if I've got enough money." She felt for her purse, but the boy waved it away. "It's free for friends of the company. But hurry up, it's started." Slipping into her seat, Maya was glad the theatre was dark. The twins couldn't stop her coming exactly, but she didn't want to be seen by them all the same. Then in an instant she was in New York, in a grocer's shop, where little Cedric was talking to his friend, the grocer, about the wickedness of the aristocracy. Clovis was good. He didn't look 7, of course, or even 8 or 9, but in his sailor suit, with his wig of long fair curls, he certainly looked like an appealing little boy. And his voice was steady, a clear high treble. Maya could feel the children in the audience hanging on to his words. Now a gentleman from England came on stage, a lawyer rather like her own, Mr. Murray, and with him was Dearest, Cedric's mother, who explained to her son that he was really a lord. Clovis was being very good about calling his mother Dearest, even better than on the boat. Maya forgot her worries and settled down to enjoy the play. Soppy or not, Little Lord Fauntleroy was a good story, and when the little boy was given a lot of money, which he gave to his poor friends, he did not keep for himself. A great sigh went round the audience. Maya stayed in her seat during the first interval and kept her head down. The twins were several rows further back and hadn't seen her, but she could hear them giggling about something and then nagging their mother to buy them some more chocolates. In the second act, little Lord Fauntleroy and Dearest reach the great castle, which he will inherit, and Cedric melts the hard heart of the old aristocrat, his grandfather. In the book, he also made friends with a large, fierce dog, but the Goodleys had left the dog out, which was a pity. It was really very touching how just by believing that his grandfather was a good man, Cedric was making him become good. And Maya wondered if it might work with the twins. If she really believed they were kind, would they become kind? By now, Maya had forgotten all her anxieties. Clovis was a really very good actor, and the audience was loving him. The last act, as in most plays, is the exciting one. A wicked woman turns up at the Earl's castle and pretends that her son is a real Lord Fauntleroy. Of course, it turns out not to be true. Everyone is very much upset, although Cedric, needless to say, behaves beautifully. When he thinks he may not be the real Lord Fauntleroy, Cedric doesn't worry at all about not being rich and grand anymore. All that worries him is the thought that his grandfather might stop loving him. And he turns to him and puts his hand on the old man's knee and says, "Will I have to stop being your little boy?" And it was on this moving sentence that it happened. Clovis turned to face the old man and began his speech, and suddenly his voice cracked. He stopped and tried again, and this time he said, "Will I have to stop being your little boy?" in a deep voice. If no one had taken any notice, it probably would have righted itself. Everyone was on Clovis's side, but the twins started it. They giggled and tittered. Their titters grew louder, and then the other children who held back joined in, and in a moment the audience was laughing, and the children were all falling about. But not all of them. Not Netta, not Sergei, and certainly not Maya, who sat with her hand over her mouth. But enough of them, enough to go on jeering and laughing through the next two speeches. And then Clovis gave a gasp. He turned and ran away into the wings, and the curtains came down. Maya had been standing outside the stage door for half an hour. She had no idea how she was going to get home, but she couldn't leave Clovis in this state of misery. Many of the actors had gone past, but not him. At last, she pushed open the door. There was a babble of loud voices talking about cancellation, about final losses and disaster and disgrace. Everyone was angry. Everyone was in a state. "Can I see Clovis?" she asked bravely, and they motioned with their hands to the stairs which led to the dressing rooms. It took her a while to find him in the huge theatre, but at last she pushed open the right door and found her friend, face down on a couch with his shoulders heaving. "Clovis, don't! You mustn't be like that. It's something that can happen to anyone. You were terribly good up until then." He sat up. His face was blotched. He was still crying. "You don't understand. They're furious. They'll have to cancel all the matinees and lose a lot of money. I can't stand it any longer. I'm going to stow away on the boat and go back to England." Maya looked at him in dismay. "They'll find you. Stowaways are always found. Haven't you got an understudy?" Clovis shook his head. There was a boy in the last place, but he got typhoid. He got up and really seemed to see Maya for the first time. "You've got blood on your hand. Did you know?" She shook her head impatiently. "It doesn't matter, Clovis. You've got to pull yourself together. It's such a little thing." "It is to you, because you're not on the stage, and you don't know the Goodleys." He looked at her, and there were still tears in his eyes. "Maya, I've got to get home. Can't you help me? I'll do anything to get away." "I'll try, Clovis. I'll really try." She broke off as a furious voice out in the corridor was heard calling her name. Mrs. Carter had tracked her down. "I have to go. Look, Clovis, let me think. Just give me time. And don't be so sad. I'll help you somehow. There must be something we can do." And I'm going to stop there, and you can listen to Miss Burrows, who's going to read chapter 7 for you. Thank you for listening, Year 5. I hope you enjoyed it.